So what I wanted to talk today about was what's fundamental to geospatial and what's delivered, particularly in the Geospatial 2.0 world. Why Geospatial 2.0 is so different. And I really wanted people to understand the difference between context, insight, reasoning, and action. And more often than not, folks get confused about what insight is and what reasoning or intelligence is. So let me provide, first of all, a simple example. Imagine that you're standing outside and you smell smoke. You walk around a corner and you see flames coming from a house. The wind's blowing, which is whipping up those flames. And out of the blue, you hear a voice shouting help. That's context. Now, your insight would be connecting all of those dots. Your insight would be, I think there's probably somebody inside of that house that needs saving. What should I do next? That's insight. So where we live in the world quite most often, particularly in geospatial, is in those first two pieces, context and insight. The decision-making place is where 2.0 really kicks in, and that's where we're talking about reasoning. So if you think about the mental process you have to go through in deciding what to do next, that's a complex process. That takes a deeper part of your brain to actually think through, is the person upstairs? Should I put a ladder in there? Should I wrap myself around in a wet blanket and run through the front door? Should I go through the back door? Should I call somebody to get them in? So you've got to make a decision on the spot about something that's happening right now. You might be saving a life. Once you've made that decision, you take an action. And that action would be some way to save that person's life inside of that house. So they're the four elements that make up that scenario. Again, we live in a world which is really based around context and insight at the moment. The decision-making process is a human process, like I've just described. Where 2.0 really changes the game is 2.0 has a reasoning aspect to it, an intelligent reasoning engine, which takes that context and insight and helps somebody make that decision. So again, imagine you're standing next to a brain in that same situation, and you can ask questions of that brain that knows things about the layout of the house, maybe any number of other things about what's going on in the house. So your brain and this artificial brain can help make the best decision based on what's happening right now, and then take that right action. So that's the big difference between what I call Geospatial 1.5 and what I call Geospatial 2.0, that the context and insight is fed into a reasoning engine which works with you to then take an action. So I hope that sort of analogy helps people understand that very significant difference between insight and reasoning. So the second piece I was going to add to this conversation is LLMs and reasoning engines. We increasingly hear more about reasoning, and we see them attached to LLMs, but there's a fundamental difference between a reasoning engine and an LLM. Now, an LLM is a pattern matcher, basically. So what does that mean? It means it's learned lots of, it's actually guessing at the next word fundamentally, but that doesn't really help us in this explanation. But really what it's doing is being trained on, it's training on all this data, and it's pattern matching. So when you ask it a question, it's going out looking for those patterns out there which relate to what you're talking about, and gives you a reasoned answer to that. So there's no intelligence there per se. It's much more doing pattern matching, the same as insight. So in essence, an LLM is giving you insight. Insight is a really pattern matching. I gave the analogy, the fire and the smoke and the person shouting. Insight is connecting those dots and really understanding that there's a pattern here, and therefore you've then got to get a reasoning, deeper thought on what you do next. That's essentially what an LLM is. Now, people are connecting LLMs and building out sort of, let's call them reasoning helpers, because you can actually sort of fake reasoning within an LLM. So you'll read a lot about sort of these pseudo reasoning engines, but if they're built on an LLM, they aren't true reasoning. There aren't very many actual reasoning engines out there. I've mentioned Versus, Genius. There's a couple of others on the marketplace that are evolving, but undoubtedly the next big phase of AI, we'll see the evolution of LLMs, but the next big evolution of AI will be in this reasoning world, because given the analogy I just described, the power of having AI fed real-time data that can help you think through a problem and is learning is massive. So as people are on this 2.0 journey, moving beyond just insight, the first natural step might be actually setting up these kind of pseudo reasoning engines with LLMs. I know quite a few people are already doing that kind of work. The giant leap is really when we can actually use a reasoning engine like Genius that has those capabilities just like our brain to make that giant leap. So, critical piece to the conversation in 2.0. Why 2.0 is such a giant leap, why it's an advance on the existing geospatial world, the 1.5 world. Now, I will talk in another talk after this one about how potentially 1.5 could be integrated into the 2.0 world. So watch this space for that talk. But for today, I hope that that clarifies this notion of insight and reasoning, and how reasoning can augment us in terms of those decision-making and action processes when things, at any time, critical or not critical. So, love your feedback, love your questions. Thanks for watching. I'll do another one of these very soon.